Marcus Chun had been walking the debris field for 3 hours when he found her. The wreckage of the transport ship stretched across the barren moon's surface like scattered bones, twisted metal gleaming under the pale light of the distant star. His boots crunched on crystalline dust as he moved between the larger pieces, scanner in hand, searching for anything salvageable. The Galactic Council had written off this sector after the Void Pirates' latest raid. Too remote, they said. Too dangerous to mount a rescue operation. But Marcus wasn't part of the Council's bureaucratic machine. He was just a freelance salvage operator with a conscience and a stubborn streak that had gotten him into trouble more times than he could count. His scanner beeped softly, indicating life signs ahead. Marcus frowned, adjusting the device's sensitivity. The readings were weak, but definitely there. He quickened his pace, climbing over a section of hull plating that had been peeled back like the lid of a can. That's when he saw her. She was huddled in the shadow of what had once been the ship's medical bay, knees drawn up to her chest, arms wrapped around herself in a futile attempt at warmth and modesty. Her skin was pale, almost luminescent in the dim light, covered in fine scratches and bruises. But it was her ears that made Marcus stop dead in his tracks, pointed, tufted with soft fur that matched the silver hair falling in tangles around her shoulders. A long, slender tail curled around her feet, the tip twitching with what he recognized as either fear or pain. A Felinian. He'd heard of them, but never seen one in person. The cat-like humanoids were rare, their homeworld destroyed in some ancient conflict that most species had forgotten. The few survivors were scattered across the galaxy, often ending up as servants or worse in the households of the wealthy and powerful. Her eyes, large, amber, and filled with a wariness that spoke of recent trauma, fixed on him as he approached. She tensed, ready to flee despite having nowhere to go. Marcus could see the calculation in her gaze, weighing the threat he might pose against the certain death that awaited her on this airless rock. "Hey there," Marcus said softly, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. He slowly reached up and activated the translation circuit built into his helmet, the small device humming to life. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Felinian's ears flicked forward slightly, a sign of attention that Marcus took as encouragement. She didn't speak, but her tail had stopped its agitated twitching. Marcus carefully shrugged out of his emergency survival jacket, the thick, insulated garment designed to keep a human alive in harsh environments for up to 72 hours. He held it out toward her, making sure to keep his movements slow and predictable. "You must be cold," he said. "Here, take this." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, with a swift motion that spoke of desperation overcoming caution, she reached out and snatched the jacket from his hands. She pulled it on quickly, the garment far too large for her slight frame, but providing the coverage and warmth she desperately needed. "What's your name?" Marcus asked, settling into a crouch a few meters away to make himself less imposing. The Felinian studied him for several heartbeats before speaking, her voice barely above a whisper. "Lyra, I'm Marcus. Can you tell me what happened here, Lyra?" Her ears flattened against her head, and for a moment Marcus thought she might bolt. But then she spoke, her words coming in a rush, as if she needed to get them out before her courage failed. "Pirates," she said. "They came 3 days ago, killed everyone, took what they wanted, and left the rest to die in the void." Her voice caught. "I hid. I'm a coward. I hid while they murdered my friends." Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest. The Void Pirates were a plague on the outer systems, preying on merchant vessels and refugee transports with impunity, while the Galactic Council issued strongly worded condemnations and did nothing of substance. But he pushed the emotion aside. This wasn't the time for righteous fury. "You're not a coward," he said firmly. "You're a survivor. There's a difference." Lyra looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "You don't understand. I had a duty to the others. I was supposed to protect them, but I failed." "How many others were there?" Marcus asked gently. 43 souls, Lyra whispered. "Refugees from the corporate wars. We were heading to the free colonies to start over." She laughed bitterly. So much for new beginnings. Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing what she'd told him. 43 people dead because they'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time. It wasn't unusual in this part of the galaxy, but that didn't make it any easier to stomach. Lyra, he said carefully, what was your duty? What were you supposed to protect them from? She looked down at her hands, which Marcus now noticed bore the calluses and small scars of someone accustomed to physical labor. I was their guardian, she said. My people were natural warriors when we need to be. Fast, strong, good reflexes. But I froze when it mattered. The pirates came aboard and I just hid. Marcus studied her more carefully. Despite her obvious distress and the trauma she'd endured, there was something about the way she held herself that suggested coiled strength. Her muscles, though lean, were clearly defined. Her eyes, while currently filled with pain, had a sharpness to them that spoke of someone accustomed to being alert and ready for danger. You were one person against how many pirates? He asked. 7 that I saw, Lyra admitted. But that's not the point. I should have tried. I should have done something. You did do something, Marcus said. You stayed alive. That means their sacrifice wasn't completely meaningless. Lyra's ears flicked uncertainly. I don't understand. Marcus stood slowly, offering his hand to help her up. You could tell their story. Make sure they're remembered. But first, we need to get you off this rock. My ship is about 2 clicks from here. Can you walk? She looked at his outstretched hand for a long moment before taking it. Her grip was stronger than he'd expected, and she rose to her feet with a fluid grace that reminded him of the large cats from Earth's ancient past. I can walk, she said then, hesitated. But why are you helping me? I am nobody, just another refugee with nothing left to lose. Marcus began walking toward his ship, adjusting his pace to match hers. Where I come from, he said, we have a saying, a person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by what they're willing to do for others. You were willing to die protecting 43 strangers. That tells me everything I need to know about your worth. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, picking their way through the wreckage field. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his unexpected companion. Despite everything she'd been through, despite the trauma and loss, there was something unbroken about her. Bent perhaps, but not shattered. Marcus, Lyra said suddenly, breaking the silence. Where are you from? Your accent, it's not like anything I've heard before. Earth, Marcus replied. Sol system. Ever heard of it? Lyra shook her head. The names sound familiar, but I can't place it. Are your people common in this sector? Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. Hardly. We're what you might call newcomers to galactic civilization. Only been part of the greater community for about 50 years. Most species still think of us as primitive upstarts who got lucky with faster-than-light technology. But you're here, helping a stranger when you could have just taken what you wanted from the wreckage and left, Lyra observed. That's what humans do, Marcus said simply. We're pack animals by nature. When we see someone in trouble, especially someone who's been treated unfairly, it brings out something in us. A need to help, to fight back against the cruelty of the universe. Lyra was quiet for a moment, processing this information. That must make you very unpopular with certain elements of galactic society. You could say that, Marcus agreed. The Hegemony Corporation has put a nice bounty on my head for interfering with their legitimate business operations. The Void Pirates aren't too fond of me either, come to think of it. You fought them before? Marcus nodded grimly. Pirates, slavers, corporate death squads, corrupt officials. Anyone who preys on the weak and helpless. It's become something of a hobby of mine. They crested a low ridge, and Marcus's ship came into view. The Defiant wasn't much to look at, a modified cargo hauler with jury-rig weapon systems and armor plating that had seen better days. But she was fast, reliable, and had enough firepower to make most pirates think twice about picking a fight. Lyra stopped walking, staring at the ship with wide eyes. That's yours. Home sweet home, Marcus confirmed. She's not pretty, but she'll get us out of here safely. The question is, where do you want to go? For the first time since he'd found her, Lyra smiled. It was a small, hesitant expression, but It transformed her face completely. "I don't know," she admitted. "I hadn't thought that far ahead. I was so focused on just surviving the next hour, then the next day." "That's okay," Marcus said gently. "You don't have to decide right now. The galaxy's a big place, and there's still good people in it. People who would be honored to call someone like you a friend." As they approached the ship's boarding ramp, Lyra suddenly stopped and turned to face him. "Marcus, I need you to understand something. I'm not helpless. What happened on that transport, that was a moment of weakness, of fear. But it doesn't define who I am." Marcus met her gaze steadily. "I never thought it did. Fear is a natural response to overwhelming odds. The fact that you're standing here, alive, and talking about the future tells me you're stronger than you think." Lyra nodded slowly, something settling in her expression. "Good, because I have a feeling this is just the beginning of something. And when the time comes to face those pirates again, I want to be ready." Marcus felt a familiar stirring in his chest, the same feeling he got whenever he encountered someone who refused to let the galaxy's cruelties break their spirit. "Well then," he said, gesturing toward the ship, "let's get started. The first lesson in fighting back is knowing you're not alone." As they climbed the boarding ramp together, neither of them could have predicted how this chance encounter would change both their lives and send ripples throughout the outer systems. But that's a story for another day. For now, it was enough that two souls had found each other in the darkness, and that was how the best kinds of rebellions always began. The interior of the Defiant was surprisingly comfortable, Lyra discovered. Where she had expected the sterile functionality common to most spacecraft, Marcus had created something that felt almost like a home. The corridors were lined with soft lighting that mimicked natural sunlight, and the air carried the faint scent of growing things. Small plants in carefully maintained hydroponics units provided both oxygen recycling and a touch of green life that soothed the soul. Marcus led her to the medical bay, a compact but well-equipped space that spoke of someone who frequently found themselves patching up the wounded and traumatized. The bio bed hummed to life as they entered, its sensors automatically beginning a preliminary scan. "Let's get you checked out," Marcus said, his tone professional but gentle. "I'm not a doctor, but I've had enough field medic training to handle most emergencies." Lyra perched nervously on the edge of the bio bed, still wrapped in Marcus's oversized emergency jacket. The medical scanners painted patterns of light across her body, and she tensed as the readings appeared on the nearby display screen. Dehydration, malnutrition, exhaustion. Marcus read off the results. Some superficial cuts and bruises, but nothing serious. "You're tougher than you look." He moved to a nearby cabinet and began pulling out supplies. "When was the last time you ate?" Lyra had to think about it. The past 3 days blurred together in a haze of fear, grief, and desperate survival. "Before the attack," she said finally, "there wasn't much food in the wreckage, and what little I found went bad quickly in the heat." Marcus nodded understandingly. "The emergency rations probably wouldn't have agreed with your digestive system anyway. Most species-neutral food tastes like recycled cardboard and has about as much nutritional value." He handed her a water pack and a small device that looked like a handheld scanner. "This is a dietary analyzer. It'll scan your biochemistry and synthesize food that's actually suitable for Felinian physiology." Lyra accepted the device gratefully, surprised by Marcus's thoughtfulness. Most humans she'd heard about were notoriously self-centered, concerned only with their own needs and desires. But Marcus seemed different. He anticipated needs she hadn't even voiced and went out of his way to accommodate her unique requirements. The synthesizer hummed for a moment before producing what appeared to be a thick, protein-rich broth with chunks of what looked like meat. Lyra sniffed it experimentally, her enhanced senses detecting flavors and nutrients that her body craved after days of deprivation. "It's good," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "Thank you. Don't mention it," Marcus replied, settling into a chair across from her. "While you eat, maybe you can tell me more about what happened. I know it's painful, but understanding the details might help us figure out our next move." Lyra sipped the broth slowly, feeling strength returning to her body with each swallow. The transport was called the New Dawn, she began. Captain Torres was a good man, honest. He made a living running refugees and legitimate cargo to the outer colonies. We've been traveling for 6 days when the pirates found us. She paused, her ears flattening as the memories returned. Marcus waited patiently, understanding that forcing the story would only cause more trauma. They came out of nowhere, Lyra continued. One moment we were cruising through normal space, the next we were being boarded. The ship's defenses were minimal. Captain Torres wasn't a warrior, just a decent man trying to make a living helping people escape bad situations. What kind of bad situations? Marcus asked gently. The corporate wars have been getting worse in the inner systems. Hegemony Corporation has been expanding aggressively, absorbing smaller companies and displacing entire populations in the process. Most of the refugees were former employees who refused to sign the new loyalty contracts. Lyra's tail lashed angrily. They call them employment agreements, but they're really just slavery contracts. Sign up for life, surrender all personal rights, become property of the corporation. Marcus felt his jaw clench. He'd seen the effects of hegemony's expansion firsthand, entire worlds stripped of resources and left as toxic wastelands. The corporation's executives lived in luxury, while billions of beings struggled to survive in the economic chaos they created. The passengers were good people, Lyra continued. Families mostly. Engineers, teachers, craftspeople, farmers. They just wanted to start over somewhere they could be free. Her voice broke slightly. There was this little girl, maybe 8 years old. She reminded me of my sister before our world fell. Marcus reached out and gently touched her shoulder. You don't have to continue if it's too painful. Lyra shook her head. No, I need to say this. The pirates didn't just kill them cleanly. They took their time, made it hurt. They were looking for something specific, and when they couldn't find it, they got frustrated. That's when the torture started. What were they looking for? I don't know exactly. They kept asking about the package and the coordinates. Captain Torres kept telling them he was just running refugees, but they didn't believe him. Lyra set down the empty broth container, her hands trembling slightly. They killed him last, after they'd made him watch what they did to his passengers. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing the horror of what Lyra had witnessed. The pirates weren't just criminals. They were monsters who took pleasure in inflicting suffering. It made what he was planning to do feel not just justified, but necessary. Lyra, he said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Do you want revenge? She looked up at him with those large amber eyes, and for a moment Marcus saw past the trauma and grief to the core of strength that lay beneath. Yes, she said simply, but not just revenge. Justice. Those pirates are still out there, still preying on innocent people. Someone needs to stop them. It won't be easy, Marcus warned. The Void Pirates aren't just a small gang. They're a network of ships and crews that spans half the sector. They have bases, resources, political connections. Fighting them means taking on a criminal empire. I understand that, Lyra replied, and there was something in her voice that made Marcus look at her more carefully. But I also understand something else. You're not just a salvage operator, are you? Someone doesn't build a ship like this just to collect scrap metal. Marcus smiled, recognizing the sharp intelligence behind Lyra's observation. You're right. Salvage work is my cover, but my real job is something else entirely. I hunt the hunters. Pirates, slavers, corrupt officials, corporate death squads. Anyone who preys on the weak and innocent. By yourself. Usually yes. It's safer that way. Harder to betray someone when there's only one of you to betray. Marcus paused, studying Lyra's expression. But I've been thinking that might need to change. One person can only do so much, even with a ship like this. Lyra's ears perked forward with interest. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you a choice, Marcus corrected. I can drop you off at any number of safe colonies where you can start over, build a new life. Live in peace. Or, he gestured toward the ship's armory. visible through the medical bay's transparent doors. You can help me make sure what happened to your friends doesn't happen to anyone else. Lyra followed his gaze to the weapons and equipment stored in the armory. She could see everything from simple sidearms to sophisticated military-grade assault rifles, all meticulously maintained and ready for use. There were also more specialized items: surveillance drones, computer slicing equipment, explosives, and things she didn't immediately recognize but which looked decidedly lethal. "You're asking me to become a vigilante," she said. "I'm asking you to become a guardian," Marcus replied. "The same thing you were on that transport, but with better equipment and backup. The galaxy is full of people like your friends, good, decent beings just trying to live their lives in peace. They deserve someone looking out for them." Lyra was quiet for several minutes, weighing the offer. The safe choice would be to accept Marcus's protection and disappear into one of the outer colonies. She could find work, maybe even start a family eventually. Live the quiet life that her people's ancient teachings said was the path to contentment. But those same teachings also spoke of duty, of the obligation to protect those who could not protect themselves. Her failure on the transport would haunt her for the rest of her life if she didn't at least try to make amends. "If I agree to this," she said finally, "I want to be more than just muscle. My people are naturally gifted fighters, but we're also excellent scouts, trackers, and infiltrators. I want to be a full partner in this, not just hired help." Marcus nodded approvingly. "I was hoping you'd say something like that. The lone wolf approach has its limitations, and I've been running into more situations lately that require a more sophisticated touch." "What kind of situations?" "The criminal networks are getting more organized, more connected. They're sharing information, coordinating their activities. Some of them have started working directly with corrupt elements in the Galactic Council. It's becoming harder to predict their movements and stop them before they can do damage." Marcus stood and moved to a wall display showing a map of the local sector. "There are at least 7 different pirate groups operating in this region alone, and I suspect they're all connected somehow." Lyra joined him at the display, studying the marked locations of recent attacks. Her enhanced vision picked up patterns that might have escaped purely human analysis. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a cluster of incidents. "These attacks aren't random. They're following trade routes, but not the obvious ones. These are backup routes, the kind used when the main shipping lanes become too dangerous. Which means they have inside information," Marcus concluded. "Someone with access to shipping schedules and route planning. Or someone with that information is feeding it to them," Lyra suggested. "A corrupt official in the Merchants Guild or the Port Authority." Marcus turned to look at her with newfound respect. "You're right. I hadn't considered that possibility. This is exactly the kind of thinking I need more of." Lyra felt a warm glow of satisfaction at his praise, followed immediately by a stab of guilt. Here she was, pleased with herself for puzzle solving, while the bodies of her friends lay cooling on that barren moon. She pushed the guilt aside with an effort of will. The best way to honor their memory was to make sure their killers faced justice. "So where do we start?" she asked. Marcus smiled, and for the first time since she'd met him, the expression reached his eyes. "We start by getting you properly equipped and trained. You may have natural advantages, but fighting pirates requires specific skills and equipment. Then we do some investigating, track down these information leaks, and start cutting off their sources of intelligence. And then we hunt them down one by one until they're all either dead or in prison." Marcus's expression grew cold. The galaxy has been letting them run wild for too long. It's time someone reminded them that every action has consequences. As they began planning their campaign against the Void Pirates, neither Marcus nor Lyra realized that they were about to become the stuff of legend. The story of the human and the cat girl who declared war on the criminal underworld would spread throughout the outer systems, inspiring hope in some and fear in others. But that was still in the future. For now, they had work to do, and the universe was about to learn what happened when humanity's protective instincts combined with Felinian determination and skill. The hunt was about to begin. 3 weeks after rescuing Lyra from the wreckage, Marcus watched her move through the ship's converted cargo hold with fluid grace that made his own movements seem clumsy by comparison. She had adapted to shipboard life with remarkable speed, but it was her progress in combat training that truly impressed him. The Felinian was a natural warrior, just as she'd claimed. Her reflexes were inhuman, her balance perfect, and her ability to move silently through even the creaking corridors of spaceship bordered on supernatural. What she lacked was proper training in modern weapons and tactics, gaps that Marcus had been working to fill. Again, Marcus called out as Lyra completed another run through the obstacle course he'd set up. She just navigated a series of moving barriers while engaging multiple holographic targets, and her time was improving with each attempt. Lyra wiped sweat from her brow and checked the score displayed on her training rifle. Perfect accuracy, again. I think I'm getting the hang of this, she said, though her tone suggested she was being modest. More than getting the hang of it, Marcus replied. You're better with that rifle than most Special Forces soldiers I've worked with. Your natural advantages, combined with proper training, make you incredibly dangerous. Good, Lyra said with satisfaction. Because I've been thinking about our investigation, and I have some ideas about how to track down the pirates' information source. Over the past weeks, they have been gathering intelligence on the various criminal organizations operating in the sector. Marcus's contacts in the underworld had provided some useful leads, but the big picture remained frustratingly elusive. The pirates were definitely coordinating their activities, but the source of their inside information remained a mystery. I'm listening, Marcus said, settling onto a storage crate that served as an impromptu chair. Lyra began pacing, a habit she developed when working through complex problems. We've been approaching this like humans would, she said, looking at data patterns, analyzing shipping records, trying to find illogical connections. And that's wrong. Not wrong, but incomplete. My people think differently about information flow. We consider emotional and personal connections as much as logical ones. Lyra stopped pacing and turned to face him. What if the leak isn't someone selling information for money? What if it's someone with a personal grudge? Marcus frowned, considering this. Go on. Look at the pattern of attacks again, but this time consider the emotional impact. The pirates aren't just hitting profitable targets. They're hitting specific types of targets. Refugee ships, aid convoys, small independent merchants. People who are already vulnerable or were trying to help others. Understanding dawned in Marcus's eyes. Someone with a hatred for refugees and aid workers. Someone who sees them as a threat or a nuisance. Exactly. And there's one organization that fits that profile perfectly. Lyra pulled up the sector map on her portable display. The Colonial Administration Bureau. They're responsible for managing refugee resettlement and coordinating aid shipments. They also have access to all the shipping schedules and route information the pirates would need. Marcus stood and began pacing himself, his mind racing through the implications. The CAB has been pushing for stricter immigration controls lately. They claim the refugee influx is straining colonial resources and causing social instability. What if someone in the CAB decided to solve the refugee problem by making sure the refugees never reach their destinations? Lyra suggested darkly. The idea was horrifying, but Marcus had seen enough of galactic politics to know it was entirely plausible. Government officials had committed genocide for much less compelling reasons than maintaining their bureaucratic authority. We need proof, Marcus said. Accusations like this require solid evidence, or we'll just be dismissed as conspiracy theorists. I've been thinking about that too, Lyra said with a smile that showed her pointed canine teeth. My people are excellent at infiltration. I could get close to the CAB offices, maybe even get inside their computer systems. Marcus shook his head immediately. Too dangerous. If you're caught, they'll either kill you or turn you over to corporate security. Either way, we lose our only lead, and you pay the price. Then what do you suggest? Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking through their options. They needed information, but they also needed to avoid alerting their targets to the investigation. A frontal approach would likely result in evidence being destroyed and conspirators disappearing into the galactic bureaucracy. We need a different kind of infiltration, he said finally. Not physical, but social. Someone who can get close to CAB personnel and earn their trust. Someone like who? Like a concerned citizen with information about refugee smuggling routes. Marcus smiled grimly. I think it's time for me to become a whistleblower. 2 days later, Marcus sat in the sterile waiting room of the Colonial Administration Bureau's regional headquarters on Epsilon Station. He'd cleaned himself up, traded his usual work clothes for a respectable business suit, and crafted an identity as a shipping coordinator who'd stumbled across information about illegal refugee transportation. The story was plausible enough. Independent shipping contractors often discovered things they weren't supposed to know about, and reporting suspected criminal activity to the authorities was considered good citizenship. What made Marcus's approach clever was that he was volunteering information rather than asking for it, which would make CAB personnel more likely to trust him. Mr. Chun, a woman in a crisp uniform appeared in the waiting room. Deputy Administrator Korvac will see you now. Marcus followed her through a maze of corridors lined with propaganda posters promoting colonial unity and economic prosperity. The building had the soulless efficiency common to government facilities throughout the galaxy, all polished floors and harsh lighting designed to intimidate visitors into compliance. Deputy Administrator Korvac turned out to be a middle-aged Centaurian with the soft appearance of someone who'd spent his career behind a desk. His office was decorated with commendations and photos of him shaking hands with various colonial officials, the kind of career bureaucrat who measured success in terms of political connections rather than actual accomplishments. Please sit, Korvac said, gesturing to a chair across from his oversized desk. My aide says you have information about illegal refugee transportation. Marcus settled into the chair and pulled out a data pad containing carefully fabricated shipping records. I've been working as an independent coordinator for several small freight companies, he began. Last week I noticed some irregularities in cargo manifests that made me suspicious. He handed the data pad to Korvac, watching the administrator's expression carefully as he reviewed the false information. The records showed refugee ships using routes and schedules that didn't match official CAB authorizations, exactly the kind of discrepancy that would concern someone legitimately trying to maintain order. This is troubling, Korvac said, but Marcus caught a flicker of something else in his expression. Not surprise or concern, but calculation. These routes you've identified, they're not on our approved list. That's what worried me, Marcus replied. I thought you should know in case there's some kind of organized smuggling operation at work. Korvac leaned back in his chair, studying Marcus with increased interest. Mr. Chun, I appreciate your civic responsibility in bringing this to our attention. The refugee situation has become quite challenging lately, and we need all the help we can get from concerned citizens like yourself. I'm just doing my duty, Marcus said modestly. Though I have to admit, I'm curious about how extensive this problem might be. Are you seeing a lot of unauthorized refugee movements? More than we'd like, Korvac admitted, and Marcus detected a note of genuine frustration in his voice. The current policies are far too lenient, in my opinion. We're allowing these people to flood into colonial space without proper screening or resource allocation. It's a recipe for disaster. Marcus nodded sympathetically. It must be difficult to maintain order when you don't have accurate information about who's going where. Exactly, Korvac exclaimed, leaning forward eagerly. How can we provide proper security and resource planning when half the refugee traffic is operating outside official channels? These smugglers and do-gooders think they're helping, but they're actually making the problem worse. Do-gooders, independent aid organizations, religious groups, private citizens who think they're saving the galaxy by helping refugees evade proper procedures. Korvac's tone grew bitter. They have no idea the chaos they're creating. Colonial infrastructures are being overwhelmed, social tensions are rising, and criminal elements are taking advantage of the confusion. Marcus was beginning to understand the psychology at work here. Korvac wasn't necessarily evil, but He was a bureaucrat who saw refugees as a problem to be managed rather than people to be helped. From his perspective, anything that simplified the refugee situation was beneficial, even if it involved cooperating with criminals. It sounds like you could use better intelligence about these unauthorized movements, Marcus suggested carefully. Korvac's eyes sharpened with interest. Indeed we could. Mr. Chun, given your position in the shipping industry, you might be in a unique position to help us identify and track these unauthorized operations. Would you be willing to serve as an informal consultant? Marcus pretended to consider the offer. I suppose I could keep an eye out for suspicious activity. What exactly would you need me to do? Simply report any unusual shipping patterns or refugee movements that don't match official schedules. We could provide you with a secure communication channel and perhaps a small compensation for your time and effort. That seems reasonable, Marcus agreed. How would I contact you if I discover something important? Korvac reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a communication device. This will put you in direct contact with our security division. They monitor refugee movements and coordinate with law enforcement agencies throughout the sector. Marcus accepted the device, recognizing it as a military-grade encrypted communicator. The CAB was definitely involved in something more sophisticated than simple bureaucratic incompetence. I appreciate your trust, Marcus said. Is there anything specific I should watch for? Large groups moving along unconventional routes, ships with altered identification codes, cargo manifests that don't match visual inspections. Korvac paused, then added with apparent reluctance. Between you and me, Mr. Chun, we've had reports that some of these refugee smuggling operations are connected to more serious criminal activity. Pirates have been known to use refugee ships as cover for their own operations. Marcus felt a chill of understanding. This was it, the connection they'd been looking for. Pirates? That's disturbing. Do you think they're targeting refugee ships specifically? It's possible. Desperate people make easy victims, and refugee ships are often poorly armed and defended. Korvac leaned back, his expression troubled. We've been trying to gather more intelligence on these connections, but it's difficult when so much refugee traffic operates outside official channels. I'll definitely keep my eyes open for anything suspicious, Marcus promised, standing to leave. Thank you for trusting me with this responsibility. As he left the CAB building, Marcus felt the satisfying weight of the encrypted communicator in his pocket. They now had a direct line into whatever the CAB was planning, and Korvac had essentially confirmed that there was a connection between refugee smuggling and pirate activity. But Marcus also felt a growing sense of urgency. If his suspicions were correct, the CAB wasn't just passively providing information to pirates. They were actively coordinating attacks on refugee ships, which meant that somewhere in the sector, another transport full of innocent people was heading toward a carefully orchestrated ambush. Back on the Defiant, Marcus found Lyra in the ship's command center, monitoring communication traffic for any signs of pirate activity. She looked up eagerly as he entered, her tail twitching with anticipation. "How did it go?" she asked. Marcus held up the communication device with a grim smile. "We're in. The CAB is definitely involved, and I think it goes deeper than we originally suspected." "How deep?" "Deep enough that we're going to need help," Marcus replied. "This isn't just about stopping a few pirates anymore. We're looking at a conspiracy that involves government officials actively targeting refugee ships for destruction." Lyra's ears flattened against her head, her expression darkening with anger. "Then we stop them. All of them. We will," Marcus promised. "But first, we need to gather more evidence and figure out exactly how extensive this network is. Then we're going to need allies, people with the resources and authority to act on what we discover." As they began planning their next moves, both Marcus and Lyra understood that they were crossing a line. They were no longer just hunting pirates. They were taking on a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of colonial government. It was dangerous work that could get them killed or disappeared into the bureaucratic machinery of galactic politics. But they also understood that stopping this conspiracy was the only way to prevent more tragedies like the destruction of a new dawn. The hunt had begun, and They would see it through to the end, no matter what the cost. The encrypted communicator had been active for 6 days when it finally delivered the intelligence Marcus and Lyra had been waiting for. The message was brief and coded, but its meaning was clear to anyone familiar with shipping terminology. A refugee transport called the Hope's Journey would be leaving Gamma Persei in 3 days, carrying 237 souls to a new life in the outer colonies. According to the CAB's official records, the ship didn't exist. Marcus stared at the message displayed on his command screen, feeling the familiar cold anger building in his chest. This was it, proof positive that the Colonial Administration Bureau was feeding information directly to the pirates. The question now was whether they could intercept the attack without blowing their cover. 237 people, Lyra said quietly, reading over his shoulder. Her voice carried the weight of someone who had seen what happened when pirates attacked refugee ships. We have to warn them. If we warn them directly, we tip our hand and lose our only source of inside information, Marcus replied, though every instinct screamed at him to contact the Hope's Journey immediately. The CAB will know their communications have been compromised, and they'll change their methods. So what's more important, saving these people or protecting our investigation? Marcus turned to look at her, seeing his own moral conflict reflected in her amber eyes. This was the eternal dilemma of undercover work. Sometimes you had to let smaller crimes happen to prevent larger ones. But when those smaller crimes involved the deaths of innocent people, the ethical calculations became nightmarishly complex. There might be a third option, Marcus said slowly. What if we don't warn the ship, but we make sure the pirates fail anyway? Lyra's ears perked forward with interest. You want to ambush the ambushers. The pirates are expecting an easy target, a lightly armed refugee ship with minimal defenses. They're not expecting to run into a heavily armed human vessel with someone who knows their playbook. Marcus began pulling up tactical displays on his screens. If we position ourselves along their likely approach route, we can hit them before they reach the Hope's Journey. That's incredibly dangerous, Lyra pointed out. We don't know how many ships they'll send or what kind of firepower they have. It could be a single raider or an entire fleet. The communication mentioned standard operations, which suggests they're not expecting serious resistance, Marcus replied. Most refugee ships surrender without a fight rather than risk passenger casualties. The pirates probably use minimal force because they don't need more. Lyra studied the tactical projections, her enhanced reflexes allowing her to process the complex three-dimensional battlefield faster than most species could manage. If we're going to do this, we need to be smart about it. Hit them hard and fast before they have time to call for reinforcements or retreat. Agreed. And we need to make sure we leave survivors who could be interrogated. Dead pirates can't tell us about the rest of their organization. Over the next several hours, they planned their ambush with meticulous care. The Hope's Journey would be traveling through the Kepler Nebula, a region of space where sensor range was limited and communications were unreliable. It was the perfect place for pirates to strike, but it was also perfect for laying a trap. Marcus plotted a course that would bring the Defiant into position 12 hours before the refugee ship was scheduled to arrive. They would power down to minimal energy signatures and wait in the shadow of a large asteroid, invisible to casual sensor sweeps, but ready to strike at a moment's notice. Remember, Marcus said as they made their final preparations, our primary objective is to protect the refugee ship. Everything else is secondary. If things go badly, we run and try again another day. Lyra nodded, though Marcus could see the tension in her posture. This would be her first real combat situation since the attack that had killed her friends, and he knew she was struggling with a complex mix of anticipation and fear. Lyra, he said gently, you don't have to do this. I can handle the ship's systems myself if you'd rather stay out of the fighting. Her tail lashed angrily. Those pirates murder my friends and countless other innocent people. I'm not hiding in the cargo hold while you fight them alone. Marcus smiled, recognizing the stubborn determination in her voice. It was the same tone she'd used when insisting on becoming a full partner rather than just hired help. In that case, let's go hunting. The journey to the ambush site took 18 hours, during which Marcus and Lyra made final preparations and tried to anticipate everything that could go wrong. The Defiance weapons systems were checked and rechecked, emergency procedures were reviewed, and backup plans were refined until they could execute them in their sleep. As they approached the Kepler Nebula, the main view screen filled with swirling clouds of colorful gas and stellar debris that created a dreamlike vista of beauty and danger. The nebula was a stellar nursery where new stars were being born, but it was also a navigational nightmare where ships could disappear forever in the maze of radiation and electromagnetic interference. "Sensors are getting fuzzy," Lyra reported from the tactical station. "Maximum detection range is down to about 50,000 kilometers." "Perfect," Marcus replied, maneuvering the ship toward their chosen hiding spot. "If we can't see them coming until they're close, they can't see us either." The asteroid they'd selected was roughly spherical and about 2 kilometers in diameter, large enough to hide the Defiance mass signature, but small enough to maneuver around quickly if necessary. Marcus brought the ship into position in the asteroid's shadow and shut down all non-essential systems, reducing their energy signature to barely above background radiation levels. Then they waited. For 11 hours, nothing happened. Marcus and Lyra took turns monitoring the sensors and trying to rest, though sleep was elusive with the tension of impending combat. The nebula's electromagnetic interference created a constant background of false sensor contacts and phantom signals that kept them on edge. Finally, at 0327 ship's time, the long-range sensors detected the Hope's journey dropping out of hyperspace at the nebula's edge. The refugee transport was exactly where the CAB's intelligence had said it would be, following the route that had been leaked to the pirates. "Contact," Lyra announced quietly, though there was no one else on the ship to hear. "Refugee vessel on approach, bearing 27 Mark V." Marcus studied the sensor readings, noting the ship's configuration and energy signature. The Hope's journey was a converted cargo hauler, much like his own ship, but larger and lacking any visible weapon systems. According to the scanner, it was operating at full capacity with minimal shielding, exactly the kind of vulnerable target that pirates preferred. "Any sign of the pirates yet?" Marcus asked. "Nothing on sensors, but that doesn't mean much in this soup," Lyra replied. "They could be anywhere within 50,000 clicks, and we wouldn't know until they powered up their weapons." They continued waiting, watching the refugee ship slowly make its way through the nebula's outer reaches. The Hope's journey was proceeding cautiously, its captain obviously aware of the dangers posed by both the nebula's natural hazards and the possibility of pirate attack. At 0401, their patience was rewarded. "Multiple contacts," Lyra called out as 3 ships suddenly appeared on the sensors, their energy signatures blazing as they dropped their stealth systems and accelerated toward the Hope's journey. 3 vessels, frigate class, moving to intercept. Marcus's hands flew over the control console, bringing the Defiance systems online with practiced efficiency. "Battle stations. Weapons hot. Shields up. Let's give these bastards a surprise they'll never forget." The Defiant erupted from its hiding place like a striking serpent, all stealth abandoned in favor of overwhelming firepower. Marcus had equipped his ship with weapons that were illegal for civilian vessels in most star systems. Military-grade plasma cannons, quantum torpedoes, and electronic warfare systems that could cripple enemy ships at long range. The pirates never saw them coming. The lead pirate vessel, a sleek Predator-class frigate painted in the black and red colors favored by the Void Pirates, was caught completely off guard by the Defiant's sudden appearance. Marcus's first salvo of plasma fire tore through their rear shields and disabled their main engines before they could even begin evasive maneuvers. "Target the weapons systems," Marcus called out as he brought the ship around for another attack run. "I want prisoners, not corpses." Lyra's fingers danced over the tactical controls within human speed and precision, targeting the pirates' weapon mounts and shield generators with surgical accuracy. Her enhanced reflexes and spatial awareness made her an ideal gunner, able to track multiple targets simultaneously while compensating for the Defiance movement and the enemy ship's evasive actions. The second pirate ship managed to get its shields up and return fire, but their weapons were designed for attacking helpless civilians, not for fighting a purpose-built combat vessel. The Defiance military-grade armor absorbed their attacks with contemptuous ease, while Marcus maneuvered for optimal firing position. Their communications are jammed, Lyra reported. They can't call for help or coordinate with each other. Good. Let's keep them confused and isolated. The third pirate vessel, apparently realizing that they had bitten off more than they could chew, tried to break off and escape back into the nebula's concealing embrace. But Marcus had anticipated this move, and the Defiant's superior engines and maneuverability allowed him to intercept them before they could disappear. "This is your only warning," Marcus broadcast on all emergency frequencies. "Surrender now and prepare to be boarded or we'll blow you out of space." The response was a desperate barrage of missile fire that Marcus evaded with contemptuous ease. These pirates were used to terrorizing helpless civilians, not fighting someone who could shoot back effectively. "Their choice," Marcus said grimly, and opened fire with everything he had. The engagement lasted less than 10 minutes. When it was over, 2 pirate ships were drifting dead in space with their crews either unconscious or surrendering, while the third was a rapidly expanding cloud of debris and radiation. Marcus had tried to disable them all, but the third ship's captain had chosen to fight to the death rather than face capture. "The refugee ship is hailing us," Lyra reported, her voice tight with adrenaline and satisfaction. "Put them through." The view screen flickered to life, showing the weathered face of an elderly human male wearing a captain's uniform that had seen better days. His expression was a mixture of relief, gratitude, and confusion. "This is Captain Morrison of the merchant vessel Hope's Journey," he said. "I don't know who you are, but you just saved our lives. Those pirates had us dead to rights." "Just doing our job, Captain," Marcus replied. "Are your passengers safe?" "Shaken but unharmed. We detected the pirate ships on long-range sensors, and were preparing to surrender when you appeared out of nowhere." Morrison paused, studying Marcus's face with obvious curiosity. "I have to ask, who are you? I've never seen a civilian ship with that kind of firepower." Marcus exchanged a glance with Lyra. They had discussed this possibility and agreed on a cover story that would protect their investigation while still providing some explanation for their presence. "Private security consultant," Marcus said. "We've been tracking these particular pirates for several weeks. Lucky for you, our intelligence suggested they might target ships in this area." It wasn't entirely a lie. They had been tracking the pirates, and their intelligence had led them here. Morrison seemed satisfied with the explanation, or at least willing to accept it without asking too many uncomfortable questions. "Well, whoever you are, the 237 souls aboard this ship owe you their lives," Morrison said solemnly. "Is there anything we can do to repay you?" "Just make sure your passengers reach their destination safely," Marcus replied. "And maybe keep this incident quiet for now. We don't want the pirates' friends to know how much we've learned about their operations." Morrison nodded understandingly. "Understood. Silent running until we reach port. Thank you again, and may the stars light your path." As the Hope's Journey continued on its way, Marcus and Lyra turned their attention to the captured pirate vessels. They had work to do, prisoners to interrogate, computer systems to slice, and evidence to gather. The night's work was far from over. But as Marcus watched the refugee ship disappear into the nebula's swirling depths, he felt a deep satisfaction that had nothing to do with their successful ambush. 237 people would live to see another day, would reach their new homes safely, would have the chance to build better lives for themselves and their children. It was exactly the kind of outcome that made all the risks worthwhile. And it was only the beginning of what he and Lyra planned to accomplish together. The interrogation of the captured pirates yielded more information than Marcus had dared hope for. The Void Pirates, it turned out, were not just a loose confederation of criminals, but a highly organized syndicate with connections reaching into the highest levels of galactic commerce and government. What Marcus and Lyra had discovered was not merely corruption, but a systematic campaign of genocide disguised as law enforcement. The lead pirate, a Scarvakari named Krex Vorthak, had initially remained silent despite Lyra's persuasive interrogation techniques. But when presented with evidence of the CAB communications and threatened with being turned over to the families of his victims, his defiance had crumbled like a house of cards. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Vorthak had snarled, his reptilian features twisted with fear and anger. "This goes all the way to the top. The Colonial Administration, the Merchants Guild, even some factions in the Galactic Council. They want the refugee problem solved permanently." Solved how? Marcus had pressed, by making sure the refugees never reach their destinations. Dead refugees don't strain colonial resources, don't create social tensions, don't vote in elections. Vorthak's laugh was bitter and ugly. "We were hired to be the galaxy's exterminators, cleaning up the mess that the bleeding hearts created." The recordings and data files recovered from the pirate ships painted an even more horrifying picture. Over the past 2 years, at least 40 refugee transports had been lost to pirate attacks while traveling through supposedly safe regions of space. Conservative estimates suggested that more than 15,000 innocent beings had been murdered in what amounted to a covert war against the displaced and desperate. But the pirates had made one crucial mistake. They had kept detailed records of their operations, including financial transactions and communication logs that directly implicated their government sponsors. Evidence that would stand up in any court in the galaxy, if they could find a court willing to hear it. "We need to take this to the Galactic Council," Lyra said as they reviewed the captured data. "This is evidence of crimes against sapient beings on a massive scale." Marcus shook his head grimly. Vorthak was right about one thing. This corruption goes too high for normal channels. If we go through official channels, the evidence will disappear and we'll probably have accidents before we can testify. Then what do you suggest? We take it to the media, all of it. Every communication, every financial record, every piece of evidence we've gathered. Make it so public that the authorities have no choice but to act. Lyra's tail twitched with nervous energy. "That's incredibly dangerous. We'll be painting targets on our backs for every corrupt official and criminal organization in the sector." "We already have targets on our backs," Marcus pointed out. "The difference is that now we have the ammunition to shoot back." They spent the next 3 days preparing their evidence package, organizing the mountain of data into a coherent narrative that even the most skeptical journalist could follow. Financial records showing payments from CAB slush funds to known pirate accounts. Communication logs detailing the coordination of attacks on specific refugee ships. Testimony from captured pirates naming their government contacts. Most damning of all were the CAB's own internal communications, recovered from Deputy Administrator Korvak's personal files. In clinical, bureaucratic language, they discussed refugee transports as problems to be resolved and pirate attacks as natural hazards of unregulated travel. "Listen to this," Lyra said, reading from one particularly incriminating message. "From Korvak to someone called Administrator Prime. The irregular shipping problem continues to strain our resources. Recommend we allow natural market forces to discourage unauthorized refugee transportation. Losses within acceptable parameters for overall sector stability." Natural market forces, Marcus repeated with disgust. They can't even bring themselves to say murder directly. The evidence package was transmitted simultaneously to news organizations throughout the galaxy, along with copies sent to reform-minded members of the Galactic Council and human government officials whom Marcus trusted. Within hours, the story was spreading through galactic communication networks faster than any government could hope to suppress it. The headlines were explosive. "Government officials conspire with pirates to murder refugees." 15,000 dead in systematic extermination campaign. The genocide the galaxy ignored. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Protest demonstrations erupted on dozens of worlds as beings who had never given much thought to refugee issues suddenly understood the scope of what had been done in their name. Religious leaders condemned the murders as an affront to every moral principle. Even traditionally conservative political factions found themselves forced to distance themselves from the conspiracy. But the most significant reaction came from an unexpected source. Incoming transmission, Lyra announced as they monitored news coverage from the Defiance Command Center. It's on a secured council frequency, but not one I recognize. Put it through, Marcus said, wondering if they were about to be arrested or assassinated. The view screen flickered to life, showing a figure Marcus recognized from news broadcasts, Admiral Sarah Chun of the Galactic Council Defense Force. She was human, one of the highest-ranking Earth officers in galactic service, and known for her uncompromising stance on military ethics. Mr. Chun, Admiral Chun said without preamble, I believe we need to talk. Admiral, Marcus replied cautiously. I'm honored, but I should probably mention that my activities aren't exactly sanctioned by any official authority. Your activities just prevented a genocide and exposed corruption that goes to the very heart of galactic government, Admiral Chun replied. From where I sit, that makes you heroes, not criminals. Lyra moved into the view screen's range, her ears perked forward with interest. What exactly are you proposing, Admiral? Justice, Admiral Chun said simply. Real justice, not the whitewash that the politicians would try to arrange. I have authority to convene a special military tribunal to investigate crimes against sapient beings. With your evidence and testimony, we can put these conspirators away for life. Marcus felt a surge of hope tempered by caution. What about the pirates and the government officials involved? The pirates will face trial for mass murder. The government officials will face trial for conspiracy to commit genocide. Admiral Chin's expression was granite hard. I've already issued arrest warrants for Deputy Administrator Korvac and 17 other CAB personnel. Simultaneously, Defense Force ships are moving to apprehend every known pirate leader in the Void Pirates organization. What about the higher-level conspirators? Lyra asked. The ones Vorthak mentioned? That's where it gets complicated, Admiral Chin admitted. Some of the individuals involved have diplomatic immunity or are protected by political considerations. But the evidence you've provided will force investigations throughout the galactic government. Even if we can't prosecute everyone immediately, their careers are over and their influence is broken. Over the following weeks, Marcus and Lyra watched as justice slowly but inexorably caught up with the conspirators. The trials were broadcast throughout galactic space, with their evidence forming the backbone of the prosecution's case. One by one, the pirates and their government sponsors were convicted and sentenced to lengthy prison terms or, in some cases, execution. Deputy Administrator Korvac proved to be a weak link in the conspiracy, providing testimony against his superiors in exchange for a reduced sentence. His revelations led to further arrests and the exposure of similar schemes operating in other sectors of galactic space. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came when Admiral Chun contacted them with news of the final pirate ship. The last of the Void Pirates' leadership has been captured, she reported during a secure communication session. The organization has been completely dismantled. Their bases have been seized, their ships confiscated, and their surviving members are either in custody or dead. All of them? Lyra asked, her voice carrying a note of satisfaction that bordered on vindication. Every single one, Admiral Chun confirmed, including the ones responsible for the attack on the New Dawn transport. Your friends have been avenged, and their murderers will never harm anyone else. After the communication ended, Marcus found Lyra standing in the ship's observation lounge, staring out at the stars through the viewport. Her posture was relaxed for the first time since he'd found her in the wreckage, and there was something approaching peace in her expression. How do you feel? Marcus asked gently. Like I can finally breathe again, Lyra replied. For months, I've been carrying the weight of their deaths, wondering if I could have done something different. Now, I know that their sacrifice meant something, that their story helped save thousands of other lives. Marcus nodded, understanding the complex mix of grief and satisfaction that came with achieving justice for the dead. What do you want to do now? The galaxy's a much safer place than it was a few months ago, but there are always new threats, new injustices that need addressing. Lyra turned to look at him, her amber eyes bright with determination. I want to keep doing what we've been doing. The galaxy is a big place, and there's still people out there who prey on the weak and innocent. Someone needs to hunt the hunters. It won't be easy, Marcus warned. We'll make more enemies, face more dangers. The life of a vigilante isn't safe or comfortable. I know, Lyra said with a smile that showed her pointed canine teeth. But I also know that I'm not alone anymore. We make a good team, you and I. Human stubbornness and Felinian cunning. Marcus smiled back, feeling the same sense of partnership and purpose that had driven them through the dark days of their investigation. In that case, let's see what new adventures the universe has in store for us. As the Defiance set course for the outer systems, where rumors spoke of a new criminal organization preying on mining colonies, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since that day. He'd found Lyra among the wreckage. What had started as a simple rescue had grown into something larger, a partnership that had brought down a genocidal conspiracy and saved thousands of lives. But more than that, it had become a friendship forged in the crucible of shared purpose and mutual respect. Lyra had found her strength again, channeling her grief and guilt into a force for justice. Marcus had found something he hadn't known he was missing, a partner who understood his drive to protect the innocent and who could match his skills in both combat and investigation. Together, they had proven that even in the vast, often cruel expanse of galactic space, a small group of determined individuals could make a difference. That courage and compassion could triumph over corruption and greed. That sometimes the best way to honor the dead was to make sure their sacrifices saved the living. The hunt would continue because there would always be new predators to face, new injustices to correct, new people who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness. But Marcus and Lyra would face whatever came next together as partners and friends bound by a shared commitment to justice. And in the depths of space, where light was precious and hope was rare, their ship flew on toward new adventures, carrying within it two souls who had found each other in the darkness and chosen to become a light for others. The universe was a big place, full of wonders and terrors in equal measure. But for those who preyed on the innocent, who thought the weak and desperate were easy targets, there was a new factor to consider. Somewhere in the void, a human and a Felinian were hunting, and they would never stop until justice was served. That was the way of things now. That was the legacy of the day Marcus Chun came across a cat girl, alone, naked, and with nothing left, and chose to offer her not just shelter, but partnership in making the galaxy a better place. The hunt would go on, and the predators would learn to fear the sound of approaching engines in the night. Justice was coming for them, carried by two unlikely allies who had found each other in the wreckage and chosen to stand together against the darkness. And across the galaxy, in refugee camps and mining colonies, in transport ships and frontier settlements, people would sleep a little easier knowing that someone was watching, someone was hunting, someone cared enough to fight back against the cruelty of an indifferent universe. The story was far from over, but this chapter had ended well. The cat girl had her claws back, the human had found his pack, and together they would write new legends among the stars.